What's up, everybody? Hope you're having an awesome Wednesday morning so far. So this is going to be a voiceover league. If you happen to see the description of the video, sometimes people look, sometimes they don't, whatever. But it is with Sultai Oculus, kind of a variant of traditional blue-black Unearth Oculus that I've been working on with things like Abrupt Decay, Grist in the main deck, mostly to help out with like the mirror match. Abrupt Decay also really good into stuff like Boros Energy, give you an additional out to Static Prisons, to Goblin Bombardments, Flip to Johnny, stuff like that. Also being an uncounterable way of dealing with opposing Oculus or opposing Psychic Frogs. In the sideboard, 2 Collector Roof, 2 Pick Your Poison. Mostly for the artifact hate, enchantment hate, things that like traditional Dimir doesn't really have access to. But kind of worth the splash with a bunch of sagas running around and decent number of Mox Opal decks here and there. So some cool tech to have access to if you think it's an option that might jump out at you. Now, I do want to say, I know some people don't like voiceover leagues and some people don't mind one way or the other. I really like voiceover leagues because it's kind of an opportunity for me to learn with you guys. Like, I've gone through and recorded the matches that I played, and to some extent I'll have like a few little notes of spots that I want to check, but really I get to go back with y'all and say, okay, this play kind of sucked. This play was pretty good. I thought about this. I wasn't thinking about this. How would I have played differently if I had thought about that? And it's a really cool learning experience for everybody involved. So I hope you stick around, enjoy the league, or enjoy the challenge with me, because this was a modern challenge. Spoiler alert, we did do pretty well, so it'll be a good one regardless. As always, down below, links to all the socials. If you want to come check out a live stream on Twitch, we should be able to get back in the live stream swing pretty quickly now. Like, the holidays are wrapping up. We've got links to like the Twitter and the Blue Sky if you want to see whenever a live stream's happening. Link to the Discord if you want to come join it. And as always, if you are enjoying the commentary, enjoying the content, feel free to leave a like. Maybe even consider subscribing to the channel. Doesn't cost you anything. Just lets you know whenever the videos go live and does a lot to help out the analytics. So thank you all so much. Stay tuned and we'll get started with round number 1 here in a second. All right, so had to cut out for a second. I just like started sneezing like crazy. Usually I just do these all in one take, but I started sneezing like crazy, so I had to drop out and like go get a Kleenex. But anyway, Sultai Oculus in the challenge. Some of the main deck flex spots I don't think I really talked about in the intro, like Graveyard Trespasser is one of in the main. I think Trespasser is a lot better in the Oculus Unearth shells than it is in traditional Murktide. Still think it's decent in both. Harbinger's in the sideboard. A lot of the matchups that you want Harbinger, you don't necessarily want Abrupt Decay or Grist. Thinking of things like Amulet Titan or Tron, like Eldrazi variants. Harbinger's a lot better, so you don't really mind boarding into like stock blue-black. And then a lot of the decks that you want Collector Roof against. Some you want Harbinger, some you don't. So it's a little bit of a toss-up. Like against Affinity, Harbinger's not great, but against like Brood Scale, you want both. So you just have to be careful about things like getting your basic swamps. You can unearth a Collector Roof, or playing Oof out on 2 and then Harbinger on 3, or understanding what the role of your individual hand is. Either way, let's get into the matches here. I know y'all didn't come here to listen to me like babble on for a while. And round number 1. Do I have any notes for round number 1? Not until game 2. On the draw, it's a kind of like Dimir Murktide hand more than it's a Dimir Oculus hand. It's a little fairer. We do have a cantrip. We can get our Surveil land. For the most part, I'm keeping this hand because of the current meta, where we're looking at a lot of opposing energy and Murktide lists, and I think this hand is decent into either one of those. Against energy, we've got a lot of cheap interaction for creatures. We've got an answer to Goblin Bombardment. Against Murktide decks, we've got answers like Frogs, Oculus, Think into Super to maybe answer Murktide later. So it kind of does the works against both of those. And on the draw game one, I don't really want to be as proactive. Like if I mull aggressively to a Frog and it's a bad Frog matchup, then yeah, if I was on the play, I would, but on the draw, kind of keep it and see what happens. It's hitting spacebar pause on here. Oh, it does. Heck yeah. So we see Polluted Delta for an island, consider, so Oculus right off the bat right there. Thankfully, we do have a Fatal Push in case they have the turn 2 Unearth. So kind of like I said on the Mulligan decision, this hand does lend itself fairly well to an opposing Oculus deck. It's not perfect. We still need to find a threat, but we've got things like these Considers, Spell Snares really good in the mirror, so I want to keep that. Find a Flooded Strand, so now we have access to our green mana. And we're kind of rolling. Like, we're just going to hold on to this Sink into Stupor in case they do find a Murktide. Otherwise, we got the blue-green Surveil Land here. I have seen some people trying out Sultai and not running the Hedge Maze, sticking with the 2 Undercity Sewers instead. I do think the Hedge Maze is really nice to have for like those early turns, turn 1 or something, where you want to get a Surveil Land. You don't need the black right away. You can go ahead and fix the green. Or for situations like here, where I need the green, I want the value of a Surveil Land, and I've got an opportunity to fetch, so being able to get the Hedge Maze is really nice. Flip over an extra land I have, so really just looking for a threat here, which Psychic Frog fits that requirement. I am happier to jam Psychic Frog here since I'm on Unearth. I do think it's important in the Unearth build to understand that more often than not, you're like a more aggressive deck. You're trying to push the envelope, so to speak. So playing out your threats proactively gives you the chance of drawing into not only more threats because you have a higher threat base, but Unearth as well. If I hold off on this Psychic Frog until I find an Unearth, then it turns into maybe next turn I draw an Unearth, I play a Psychic Frog, they wait till my end step to kill it, then I Unearth the next turn, and I'm not attacking for 2 more turns. But if I play the Psychic Frog now and draw the Unearth, then I get to Unearth next turn, and I'm attacking in 2 turns instead of 3 turns. But it kind of makes them have the answer to it right now. Obviously, like, my opponent's sandbagged 5 cards. They probably have something. Turns out that something is another Oculus, which, hey, I'm sitting pretty with these Abrupt Decays, so we get to deal with that. Don't have to worry about Counterspell or Spell Snare or something like that. Speaking of drawing the Unearth right away. It was off the Frog, so it wasn't perfect. Then at this stage, like, I could start putting cards into Frog, and I think that's reasonable if you're in a matchup where they don't have clean 1-for-1 answers. So, or you have to aggressively present the faster clock because your opponent has the inevitability. Like right now, I have the Frog going. My opponent's shown they don't have an answer to it. I kind of have the inevitability right now. If this were something like Tron or Eldrazi and they could just top deck a Devourer of Destiny and exile my Frog, then I would want to be more aggressive about throwing cards into the Frog, getting the clock going. Or if it were something like a red deck with Lightning Bolts, I'd more want to put a couple cards in the Frog so I don't have to fight over discarding to a Lightning Bolt later. But right now against Dimir, I know they've got like fatal pushes, maybe long goodbye, maybe shoot the sheriff on their turn or on their side. So I don't want to be as aggressive about throwing cards into the frog, especially when they're cards like what's in my hand right now, where everything is pretty useful. Like there's an Odawara, so we would have had our frog killed or bounced if we discarded into it. And it's going to fight over this frog. Cool, I've got answers to it, so E. Finding an Oculus off the top. Probably gonna pretty close to seal the deal here. They're not gonna have a 1-mana counter for the Oculus. They don't have Revolt for Fatal Push right now. I get an extra body. I've still got an Abrupt Decay. Still have a Sink into Stupor. Sideboarding in the Oculus Mirror. I do have to preface sideboarding by saying, like, I like trial and error with my sideboarding practice. I don't like going with a definitive one-for-one guide. So a lot of times when I'm sideboarding, I'm not sure if something's going to work, but I want to try it out and see. So here I'm boarding in a single Pick Your Poison. I don't know how good or bad it's going to be. I figure they've got the Oculus, probably have Murktide. Can answer any of those. You can always have them like sack a piece of artifact Grave Hate if they have a Ghost Vacuum or, God forbid, an Unlicensed Hearse. Something like that. I'm trimming one of a lot of the like Unearth package. So singular Oculus, single Thought Scour, single Unearth. And it's mostly because if my opponent wants to hate that stuff out, if they just have a bunch of spell bombs, they can. And I don't want to be drawing a bunch of redundant pieces of dead cards. So trimming on that aspect, leaving in like the Grist because they're great into Grave Hate. The Psychic Frogs, obviously. The Graveyard Trespasser, bringing in Mystical Disputes. Ended up cutting a Spell Pierce, a couple Force Negations because I don't want to get 2 for 1, and bringing in Nihil Spell Bombs. So we'll fight over their grave. Not care if they fight over our grave. That opening hand just did like absolutely nothing, right? Had to consider 5 lands and a Mystical Dispute. And this has Grave Hate, has Counterspell, has a cantrip, and Unearth. Spellbomb on 1. I see your Spellbomb, and I will match you a Spellbomb. I can't counterspell a frog anyway, so there's not really much of a reason to bluff it. And since I've got this Unearth, I could just jam the frog. Not really under a lot of pressure, and I think I would rather get a Surveil land and consider and try to find another land or two. Like, with these frog variants or these like frog Oculus variants, finding your 3rd land is really, really important. After the 3rd, you don't really care so much, but you really, really, really aggressively want to get to that 3rd land. Be able to frog plus snare or hardcast Oculus, counterspell plus mystical dispute, those kind of things. A great pickup. I'll just cycle the Unearth because they got the spell bomb, so I don't need to fight over that. I've got the Pick Your Poison, so I could have them sack the spell bomb and just pop it early, but I don't think that's doing a whole lot for me. This case, opponent's going to sack it anyway, so I know I get to sack my spell bomb, kind of even the playing field here. Or no, I think I choose not to sack the spell bomb because I've got the Abrupt Decay and the Pick Your Poison. So if my opponent plays a Murktide, I can go to my turn, Pick Your Poison with Counterspell backup. If they play an Oculus, I can just Abrupt Decay it and like untap and play something. So cycle it into turn, but I don't feel the need to cycle it on their upkeep, is what I should say. And then I've got like counter magic, kind of okay here. I'm all right jamming a little bit more because I have abrupt decay, so I know if they have something like a frog or an Oculus, I can answer it. I know most of the Oculus decks are playing some number of Bowmasters, usually like a low number, but some number of them. And let me talk about sequencing here too. I usually just don't expect it in the mirror because I don't care about it that much. It looks a little bit better right here than it normally does because I don't really want to fight over it and going into like open mana. But sequencing here, I could try to counterspell the frog, but if they counterspell back, then I have to go to my turn and spend all of my mana, or spend most of my mana abrupt decaying the frog on my turn, or I could like pass their turn, but they get to untap all their mana again and essentially get like a free turn cycle out of me. But if I abrupt decay, then I open up the chance of hitting a 5th land, getting to untap, play Oculus with counterspell. If I like get a Undercity Sewers here, Surveil to the yard, maybe crack Spell Bomb, untap, find a fetch land, play Oculus, hold up counterspell, and be able to fight over them having a counterspell. Something like that would be a decent turn sequence. Or in this case, just play a frog, hold up a counter. But that's kind of why I wanted to make sure I just got the fight over with on their turn so I could untap and have the ability to put a threat down on my side instead of having to deal with their frog. So, got a couple spell bombs. Always okay cycling a spell bomb and drawing into a Bowmaster. I think Bowmaster's like fine. I don't think Bowmaster scares me enough to not cast my spells, if that makes sense. And a Fatal Push, they want a Spell Pierce. I thought about Mystical Dispute just to tap them out to make sure I could land an Oculus. I wouldn't have hated that play. Now, play an Oculus. They didn't go for the counter, so I have to assume something like Shoot the Sheriff. We'll just kill the token to slow the clock down a few turns. Our hand did not line up particularly well against this Bowmaster. Unfortunately, that happens sometimes. We also have not seen some of our better threats, like the Grist or the Graveyard Trespasser. But we still have a few turns here. And if we find another threat, we've got a little bit of protection. The death by 1,000 cuts of getting hit in the face with a Bowmaster several times. Just Thought Scour into it because I got to find an answer anyway. And if my answer is like an Oculus, then I can make a token to block the Orc Army. There we draw off the Spell Bomb. Don't find an answer. Don't find a threat. So scoop it up there. I don't know what we would have drawn there, but regardless, we didn't. So on to game 3. I really don't mind. Back when the Murktide Mirror was extremely popular, before Oculus, I really liked taking the draw in the mirror because usually nothing exciting would happen on turn 1, and you've got Fatal Pushes, Mystical Disputes, Stern Scoldings, all this stuff to answer Frog on turn 2. It's changed a good bit now with Oculus because you can't really afford to have your opponent go like turn 1 Scour themselves, turn 2 Unearth Oculus with Pierce backup or something. That'll just blow you out of the water completely. It's going to end a turn, cycle the Unearth. They did get a basic swamp, which is kind of interesting. I don't really expect people to have Harbinger in post board, but when your opponent like willingly gets a basic swamp, you kind of think, okay, there's a reasonable chance that they've got one. So I want to hang on to one of these black fetches a little bit longer just to see if I can get a swamp if necessary. Jam a frog here. So we kind of got whatever our opponent does answered. We can like counterspell plus mystical dispute a Murktide Regent. Down. Beast of Fatal Push. I do think it's really funny in these mirrors how a lot of times removal is just, yeah, resolves. You don't really like fight over removal very much since a lot of people have counters. It's just like not really worth it. Both sides have some number of unearth in post board, so you'll get your threats back eventually. They kept a card on top with Consider. I've got the mana advantage right now, which is pretty nice. They tap some amount of mana on their turn for the Consider, so maybe the frog lived. Turned out it did not. Spell Bomb is fine. Like right here, opponent's missing land drops, so they're pretty inclined to like pop Spell Bomb, look for the land, which means I do have fetches to kind of start refilling my graveyard if necessary. I've got obviously a lot of ways to interact with anything that they put on the stack. Saving this Fatal Push in case they have an Oculus. I don't have like a lot of good ways of answering that outside of trying to fight over an Unearth. And that's not the most exciting place to be. At least I can cast all my spells. My opponent is at the go to discard part of the game, which they didn't discard anything relevant, which is why I'm not scrolling down on their graveyard. If they discarded like an Oculus or something, I'd show it. But instead, like I mentioned, they have Harbinger. I don't really know why, but I guess it's fine. Abrupt Decay, really good pickup for us. Spellbomb, also really good pickup. And since they're going to try to fight over this Spellbomb, I'm going to save it. If they hadn't tried to fight over it, then yeah, we would just have a Spellbomb. But if they consider it worth fighting over, then I kind of want to fight to protect it. Especially when it's just a redraw for me. And shuts off Oculus, shuts off Murktide on their side. I found the Bowmaster. Kind of make them use some cards. Like I've got stuff to do for the most part. So I just kind of want them using up some amount of their resources. Maybe I can find a copy of Grist or something. You have a Murktide. Got to find an answer to that somewhat quick. But they're down to 3 cards. Down to 2 cards, back up to 3 cards, down to 2 cards, back up to 3 cards. Doing a Graveyard Trespasser, which isn't bad for me right now. If they did manage to get this Trespasser back, there's no... Well, they got a Psychic Frog in there. This was such a sweet top deck. So rip the Grist, got to play the Grist, sack off the Frog to kill the Murktide, and then just immediately unearth back the Frog. Oh, be still my beating heart. Got an Oculus, sure. I've got an Abrupt Decay. Take that one out. You tick up Grist, trying to flip like an Oculus or something into the yard or a frog or whatever, so I could just go ahead and unearth it, but miss. Either way, opponent scoops it up to Grist plus Psychic Frog, which was so tasty, so tasty. Now we're on to round number 2. Soul NBA Gallade. If you end up watching this video, I met Soul in Atlanta, and genuinely one of the nicest opponents I've had in a game of Magic in I can't believe how long. Like, we got randomly deck checked during the 5K, and we just sat there joking back and forth for like 10 minutes about, oh, we both play Moto all the time. Why are we here around people? I could be at home, like, playing a challenge in my underwear, but instead I'm around other people. This is awkward. But really, really fun, really nice individual, really great Magic player. So it was funny to get to play there and then come back and we end up like playing here. We got Guide of Souls flipping over a basic island. So maybe Blood Moon a little bit worse, but since they're on Mardu, I'm kind of expecting not to have to deal with Blood Moon. We do have Graveyard Trespasser, which is really good against Boros and Mardu. We've got Unearth to maybe get a threat back later. Really fun line here of getting to Graveyard Trespasser away the Sajani. Like, go ahead and establish a decent board presence. Get a little bit of life. If they have an answer, they got to lose a card too, which in this case, they do have an answer to the Trespasser, discard the Flage. Would be scary if they had more cards in the yard, but instead we get to unearth back the Trespasser and exile the Flage. And it's nighttime since they didn't play a spell. Like, nighttime keeps tracking even if you don't have a creature on the battlefield with the day or night ability, as long as it has already become day or night. So we get back to this Graveyard Trespasser that's just like is dodging another Flage. It's dodging a, what's it called? Galvanic Discharge. Thought about Abrupt Decaying there, decided not to, just to hold up the ability to interact a little bit more the turn after. So they're going to take 4. Could have played a Psychic Frog. Maybe I should have. But I kind of figured, like, I'm winning this race at the moment, and I've got a reasonable amount of interaction. And if they do end up going after the Graveyard Glutton and like spending a turn dealing with that, then I get to get a removal spell, get a card that they discard, and I can still play a frog after. So this is a fight that I'm like fairly happy to take. Galvanic Discharge for a metric F-ton. Like, I could have discarded my entire hand to deal with that. Doesn't really seem worth it. Flage off the top rope. We do have the Nihil Spellbomb. So I think I end up, I was going to say, I think I end up Abrupt Decaying this Bowmaster because I know I'm just going to untap, Spellbomb, wipe away everything. But I wouldn't like blame someone for not giving up the Abrupt Decay there. Immediately, Seasoned Pyromancer off the top rope is a rough one to see. But Seasoned Pyromancer into Goblin Bombardment. Really cheeky. So Abrupt Decay showing up already, being able to take out this Goblin Bombardment if I want. Really cheeky with Goblin Bombardment and Seasoned Pyromancer because you can sack the Pyro to the Goblin Bombardment And if your opponent doesn't have like an exile effect for the Spyro right then and there, you can immediately flash back the tokens and just have like some more damage. Decide to hold on to the Abrupt Decay. I don't want to commit it until I know it's going to hit something that I want to hit. So if I had gone ahead and Abrupt Decay the Goblin Bombardment, I risk my opponent. Like, I could respond right there with Abrupt Decay the Bombardment, but I don't care about these 2 tokens. The 2 tokens aren't killing me. If they find something else, I can still interact with the Bombardment. What I don't want to happen is my opponent top decking like a Static Prison, exiling my Oculus, and me not being able to like apply any pressure. So I'm pretty much saving that Abrupt Decay for a Static Prison unless they show me something that forces the issue on the Goblin Bombardment, like another Spyro and they have a card in hand or something like that. Then I would Abrupt Decay the Bombardment. Sideboarding against Boros. I ended up bringing in a single Spell Bomb, 2 Stern Scoldings. I think I had a Toxic Deluge in this list. Bring in the 2 Harbingers against Mardu, since they are on Mardu. I don't usually bring in the Harbingers against Boros, since they're already like a Blood Moon deck. They're pretty good about getting basics early and often. So against Mardu, I will bring it in a little bit tougher for them to play around it. And then kind of like the Oculus Mirror, trimming on some number of the grave reliant pieces. Unearth, Thought Scour, consider in this case. Usually their grave hate isn't as all encompassing. They're more likely to be on stuff like Ghost Vacuum than they are to be on Nihil Spellbomb. So you can kind of overload Ghost Vacuum a little bit easier than you can a Spellbomb. Like a reasonable Thought Scour into an Oculus opening. We've got Stern Scolding or Fatal Push here, depending on what happens. They do have their basics, so this Harbinger looking not very good. I could Stern Scolding the Ocelot Pride, but choosing to Fatal Push it instead so I can save Stern Scolding another turn in case of an Ajani. Usually you'd rather use your 1-for-1 removal on creatures that aren't 2-for-1s and use your counter spells on the 2-for-1 threats. So Stern Scolding for like Ajani, for Seasoned Pyromancer, stuff like that. And spot removal for Guide of Souls, for Ocelot Pride. All right, here just aggressively trying to find lands. I could have fetched Shocked and Unearthed that Harbinger there and shut them off a red, which maybe could have been worth it. But I'm really just hoping to untap with this Oculus, have Force and Negation on their turn, and I feel like I can race the Guide and the Emperor pretty well, especially since I don't really have any other creatures that I care about. They could get back into Johnny as like a decent value piece. Unfortunately, their very last card in hand is Galvanic Discharge with exactly enough energy to kill the Oculus, so they get to exile it, immediately get it back, hit me in the face for a big chunk of damage. And we are going to be going to game 3 pretty quickly. I don't have enough cards in the yard to play another Oculus, play the Trespasser, but it's daytime, so the Emperor just forces it into a chump block. They have a redraw. Anything they find could just give them more energy to maybe fly the Emperor. Just too far behind. Need too much of a haymaker to get out of it there. So going on to game 3. I really needed to be able to hard cast another Oculus. But On the draw here, I brought a single Grist back in just because I saw Nihil Spellbomb. So since they had like more all-encompassing Grave Hate, I decided to board out an Oculus, board in a Grist. I don't think it's great, but it's kind of a necessary consideration. I'll play Grist out onto a fairly empty board. Plenty of ways that they can answer it, but if they don't, I can start filling up the yard. Maybe Oculus next turn. And decide to let it through because if they have a discharge, they can kill the Grist anyway. So there's not really a reason to like lose my token and lose my Grist if they're going to be able to deal with the Grist regardless. Crack the spell bomb in response to the hedge maze, which is right, because if they don't, I can surveil over whatever's on top there and just hard cast an Oculus. So a little bit of a unfortunate like rollout for us here. Kind of having the discharge for the Grist, having a Johnny, a really good 2-for-1 against us. We don't have another surveil land here, so I can't surveil enough cards in the yard to play this Oculus. Bombardment, flip the Johnny. Obviously a bit of a nightmare for us. So if we can find a counter spell, if we can find something to interact with, maybe even like an abrupt decay, then we could have a decent turn sequence here of playing out Oculus, holding up a piece of interaction. So shoot the Sheriff, not the worst. We need that 6th card in the yard for Oculus. I could go for shoot the Sheriff on the guide, but I'd rather like save it just in case I get a chance to tag something more problematic. Use up that 1 life. Would love to flip over a Harbinger. Not that it really would have done a ton. Just have Flage. So rough one there. We definitely lose more to like that Boros style rollout than we lose to Thoughtseize into Bowmaster kind of rollout. But fun match regardless. On to round 3. We're on the play. We do get to win a die roll. We've got Frog with Force back up on turn 2. Looks like another energy opponent. Usually when I see energy, I just assume it's Boros until otherwise proven. And when they lead on basic plains, basic mountain, that's probably a pretty safe assumption. So Thought Scour here to start filling the yard to be able to hit with the Frog. We've got a backup Frog. We got to shoot the Sheriff. We've got cards to discard to something like a Flage. Off the guides, they can't get any extra energy. They decide to go ahead and Flage our face, which is fine. We've got decent chunk of interaction. I had to do the math here as to whether or not it was worth it to just like nuke my yard, get an Oculus down. I had a lot of good cards, but I kind of feel like if they didn't have the answer to the Frog on turn 2, then they might not have the answer to the Oculus. Turns out they did have it, just in a little bit of an awkward assortment. But we get to keep hitting with the Frog. That's about all you can ask for in this matchup. It's like a 3-turn clock if I can find stuff to discard or fill my yard. Or just find an Unearth. And yeah. Hope you don't have a 3-bin charm right here. When it bends over Blood Moon. Cool. I think this is about GG's here. Because I get another card in the yard with the Oculus. I'm going to get another... I'd say... No, I forgot the Flage. This is a Flage game, isn't it? The GG's on their side. It's funny how going back and watching these, you don't even like remember what happened half the time. So Flayed shakes out Oculus, decide not to chump block, but kind of want the bodies. We're fetching, looking for an answer to the Flage, so that's why you see me like pretty aggressively going for a Surveil land there. Got the ability to chump block the Flage for a turn. I don't know why they point the 3 damage at the frog there. Wait, I do remember why. Because their last 2 cards are Make a Dude, Thraben Charm, and they get to kill off the frog. So yeah, GG's on their side. Imagine calling a shot too soon on a recording. Couldn't be me. We already talked about sideboarding for Boros, or for energy. The only real difference between Boros and Mardu is I'm usually not bringing in Harbinger of the Seas against Boros and leaving in like an extra copy of Oculus, but then like a Consider or something. So Fatal Push Guide with a 1-lander, so bunch of prides. We could Abrupt Decay the first pride, decide to just counter the second one. I can use the Abrupt Decay later if I want. Surveil on my main phase to see if I potentially flip over an Oculus. I think this is something that I don't think enough people do, is if it doesn't hurt my plays, a lot of times it's worth it to just try to Surveil on your main phase in case you just accidentally flip over an Oculus. Because if I do there, flip an Oculus, flip a Harbinger, and get to unearth it and pass with like Force Negation backup or Counterspell backup, there's a chance that the game like might just be over there. So it's kind of a good little habit to have. Now, if it messes up your lines drastically, don't do it, obviously. But if you have the chance to just like take a shot on a potential high roll, this was fun. So Static Prison my frog, get to Abrupt Decay the Static Prison, go to block the guide. Unfortunately, they have the answer, but they don't get to gain the life, so they don't get another token. And I do get a chance to just like unearth the frog on the next turn. I decided to hold up the Force instead of going for the Oculus because I was honestly a little bit scared of like another Galvanic Discharge. The Devil. So I get to save my frog and get the Ocelot Pride off the board, which is a fairly big deal. And I know I'm just going to get to untap and play Oculus anyway. So all good things. This is also why I'm not a huge fan of Ghost Vacuum. It's really good if your opponent is like casting their unearths. The problem is it's really bad against them just like hard casting Oculus or hard casting, yeah, get out of here, Wrathus guys. Hard casting Oculus or hard casting Murktide or something like that. It just doesn't hit the graveyard fast enough. So we'll let them double block the token because I know I'm just going to get back another token anyway, so it doesn't really matter. And yeah, opponent's going to scoop it up to our big flyers. Noise. On to game number 3. Reasonable-ish proactive hand. Again, Ghost Vacuum coming down. On paper, looks okay because you get to stop the unearthed stuff. Again, in reality, a little bit awkward because a lot of times you can just ignore it by overloading your graveyard. Yeah. Play around Blood Moon to the best of our ability. Get down a Psychic Frog. I really thought they were going to Felia blink the Ajani here and just like get another token, but they decided to go for the 2 damage instead. I don't know if I like that play. I think that just having another body would have been decent. Obviously, like I could discard a card and block the Felia, but you'd have a go wide board against a frog. I feel like the Felia just doesn't really matter that much, if that makes sense. Like it's a cool card, and if you get to combine it with like a Fable of the Mirror Breaker, Resolve Fable, or something like that, it can be pretty useful. But the issue there is like Resolve Fable is just kind of good on its own. You don't really need Felia with it to make it playable. And then opponent decides to like activate Ghost Vacuum on their turn, so I get to combo them. Just have the Unearth and the Oculus in hand. Which is kind of funny because I was about to cycle that Unearth at the end of their turn, and then they activated Ghost Vacuum. Like, let's see if I can rewind it. They went for the Thraben Charm. I forced it. Fatal Push resolved. Right. I was going to cycle this Unearth at the end of their turn, but they activated Ghost Vacuum in their second main phase. So I was like, cool, free Unearth on an Oculus. Like, I will absolutely take that because I get to unearth it and I get to exile the cards to fly the frog. Sweet. we will take that trade all day, every day. You've got my Fatal Push. So opponent just like a little bit more scared of Merc, I guess, and not enough scared of Oculus. For discharge, second discharge. They always have multiple discharges. Go for the Consider in response to the Ghost Vacuum so that I can fly the frog and keep them from having an Oculus. Because, like, that's absolutely a way that they can get back into this game is if they are able to put an Oculus on their field and, like, have a chump blocker, start putting more bodies on board. And the opponent's going to scoop to me, fetching to force. Played out the fetch land there, mostly just to get another card in the yard for the frog, because I knew I wanted to. I could get the green mana in case I needed, get another card in the yard. When it reveals a Devourer of Destiny, so this is round 4. Got a turn 2 frog, have a force negation, so kind of a proactive start. Okay, let's talk about this because I think this is super important. And I've seen the question about the Eldrazi matchup show up a lot recently. Two things. One, you have to be proactive in the matchup, especially game 1. You don't have consigned memories in. I've seen that my opponent has Devourer of Destiny. I cannot win the long game. I don't have the ability to get this Oculus in play very aggressively. I've got a frog. I need to interact. My opponent is showing me an opportunity to interact in 2 ways. One, stop them from advancing their mana aggressively with like the Utopia Sprawl. And 2, if I counter the Utopia Sprawl, even if they have a soul land on turn 2, they can't Kozilek's return or Kozilek's command my Psychic Frog. So my Psychic Frog should be alive for a turn to get a hit in and try to find something. So I'm slowing down Devourer. I'm stopping them from dealing with my Psychic Frog on turn 2. I'm getting some use out of this Force Negation with an Oculus that's not doing anything. And I'm taking the initiative to say, like, I have to be more aggressive. I've got to be way more aggressive. So there's the Soul Land. If they had a Kozilek's command there, they could have exiled my frog, and I would have just, like, lost on the spot. And now I've committed to getting rid of this mana, so I'm going to fight over the mana. And as we see, opponent doesn't have a third land. I know that they've got a Devourer of Destiny stranded in hand. They can't Kozilek's Command at the moment. Nope. Absolutely not. Fool me once. Now, I do find an Oculus, so we can throw that out there and hope it does something. Speeds up the clock, that's for sure. Another Psychic Frog and opponent scoops. So, I say this a lot when it comes to matchups with cards like Leyline of the Void as well. People ask how you beat Leyline of the Void, and the answer is typically like you try to do something proactive and non-grave dependent, like mull aggressively to Psychic Frog. Now, if they have Leyline plus their lands plus answers to Frog plus a way to clock you, you're probably not winning that game. Your opponent just had the nuts. But you have to pick some avenue that you can fight over and take that risk. Like if they have the Leyline, then I have to pick the avenue of here's a non-grave dependent threat. I'm going to go all in on this. If they have the Leyline and the lands and the answer to it, I got to hope I can draw out of it, but I can't fight everything. Same thing against decks like Eldrazi. If they have the mana accelerant and the card selection with stuff like Devourer and Rumble and Ancient Stirrings, they hit the land drops and they have the payoffs and they have the interaction for your Frogs or Oculus, you're not winning that game. So don't try to play around everything you possibly can. Take an assumption, preferably with some amount of outside information, like, hey, my opponent played Forest Utopia Sprawl on 1. Maybe this means I can stop their mana development. It's the only thing I've had a chance to interact with so far. Try to take an educated guess on what aspect of the plan you can attack and try to exploit that. Sideboarding against Eldrazi. Grists are out. Fatal Pushes are out. Shoots the Sheriffs out. Bring in the full 4 Consign to Memory. Bring in a single Pick Your Poison just as like a way to fight over a Talisman or something like that. Or maybe a Trinisphere. It's not great, but it's okay. I'm keeping the Abrupt Decays in as well because my goal post board is either one of 3 options. Turn 2 Frog and try to stop everything that gets Frog off the board. Aggressive Oculus, so either like turn 3 Oculus or quick Unearth Oculus, and again, fight over stuff that deals with it, or Harbinger of the Seas, fight over mana. So fighting over Malevolent Rumbles, Talismans, Utopia Sprawls, things like that, to try to lock them off of being able to cast like big colorless spells. In the case of this hand, I've got Abrupt Decay to kind of slow the game down a little bit. I've got Oculus. If I find another blue spell, I've got Force Negation to hopefully protect the Oculus from something like a Kozilek's Return or Kozilek's Command. I'm going to remember that one of these days. Kozilek's Command. Don't need more Abrupt Decays. Really just hoping to like find something that I can force a negation, get some more cards in the yard. But in showing an end of turn Kozilek's Command, we're 100% counterspelling that. Now, if they give me something to force on their turn, then I can force, untap, play an Oculus, which is huge here. That gets my clock going. It stops their mana advancement. So hopefully they can't do something like Devourer next turn. This hopefully runs them out of Kozilek's commands in hand, so maybe my Oculus lives. It's a whole bunch of what ifs, I know, but again, that's like the name of the game in these matchups is got to pick something to interact with. Find a Harbinger off the top, which is absolutely disgusting because now I get to get my basic swamp, get my Harbinger down. Yes, I have an Abrupt Decay in my hand, but the Abrupt Decay is not hitting anything at the moment. I refuse to use an Abrupt Decay on a Trinisphere if I can help it. Attacking with the 2 manifest tokens because that means an Oculus plus a single manifest token next turn is lethal. When it pays 3 for their Utopia Sprawl into Trinisphere, and we get to wrap up the game. So how do you beat Eldrazi? You pick something that you can fight over and be aggressive about it. Game 1 hand. On the play, I do want to say here that game 1 mulligan decisions on the play versus the draw usually vary pretty aggressively. So like on the draw, I'm more likely to keep a reactive hand and try to set up a threat. On the play, I really want to aggressively look for an early Oculus or a frog. Like you need to be proactive game 1 on the play in the blind. But on the draw, you kind of have to keep more reactive hands. So that first hand I saw here, we can, it's somewhere in here. Come on. Game or the first hand here, yeah, like it's got a couple lands, it's got some cantrips, but I don't have a threat and I don't have black mana, so I'm pretty happy to throw this back, just not proactive enough. And then once I see a 6 and it's got mana, it's got a cantrip, some interaction, it's just kind of, well, you got to keep this. I can't really afford to go down lower and hope to find something. It looks like back-to-back Eldrazi opponents. Now, what did I mention at the beginning of last round? If my opponent, if your Eldrazi opponent has the lands, the mana acceleration, the payoffs, this card selection, you're probably not winning that game. And here so far, they've had the lands, they've had the mana acceleration, they're showing some amount of payoffs. They've got a Null Drifter under this Ugin's Labyrinth. So 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 mana right now. They find like another land, they can Null Drifter. So just stuff like that. Like you're just not beating, main phase or main deck Bajuka Bog me. I'm never winning this game 1 in a million years unless I had like a turn 2 frog and then maybe, but probably not. This looks like a Kozilek's command, open Null Drifter. Yeah. GG. GG, go next. Just accept that this can happen. Cycling the Unearth main phase because, hey, I need to find lands. I need to be able to surveil. I don't have much else going on. Need to refill the yard. And I'm pretty sure they got a Null Drifter off that Ancient Stirring. So they just have like evoke a Null Drifter here, go back up to 5 cards. They added Null Drifter to their hand, so I know they have another Null Drifter in hand right now. Yeah, we could Fatal Push. Why did I scoop this one? Did I know they had a Devourer? I don't think so. I don't know why I scooped this one so early. Maybe I missed some piece of revealed information, but I could just Fatal Push the Eldrazi spawn, play out the Oculus. They can get a Null Drifter. If they tap out for that, I could shoot the Sheriff, the Null Drifter. I'm not in a good spot, and I'm pretty low percentage to win from there. But that was definitely a bit of an early concession, unless they revealed something and I just didn't take note of it. Like if they had a Devourer of Destiny in hand, then I could understand that scoop. Like here, they reveal a Devourer. I can't remember that first one. I doubt they did. I think it was just a bit of an early scoop. Probably like one of those, well, they got everything scoops. But here we have a frog. If they have another soul land, we can at least force a negation to fight over a Kozilek's command. Bingo. Get rid of the extra Oculus. So if we find a land, we can play out this Oculus we've already got. If we don't find a land, we can hold up, consign, spell pierce, whatever. Don't want to fight over the Ancient Stirrings because I run the risk of them just having another Kozilek's command naturally. Unfortunately, they had the Kozilek's command anyway, or they found the Kozilek's command off of the Ancient Stirrings. So it looks a lot worse for letting them resolve it. Spell pierce this. Yeah, spell pierce this so I can hold up consign on their turn. Force the rumble, because in a case like this, they've got decent mana. They've got some amount of interaction. So I'm choosing to fight over like the card selection. Hopefully stop them from finding like more copies of Myco Spawn, more pieces of interaction. They don't have a Kozilek's Return here, or Kozilek's Command, because they probably would have used it. So we'll let that go. Try to get this Oculus. Try to get this Oculus down. I do have a Devourer, so they get to take out the Oculus. I got Frog to hopefully draw a card or two. Not the end of the world. Attacking with our Frog. Try to find something like an Unearth so I can ditch the Oculus and hold up Counterspell. Perfect. Sometimes you just have to will it into existence and pray to a higher power that it's there. But if this is the turn, no. Soul Drifter. Did I have... This Frog is a 3/4. Oculus is a 5/5. I have discard, consign, discard whatever I draw. So the Frog gets up to a 5, or a 5/6. Oculus is a 5. So they're not dead if I just counterspell this Null Drifter instead of consign to memory. I think that's why I chose to consign, or no, I had to consign because I have Basic Island, so I could have counterspelled, but they weren't dead if I counterspelled, and then they chose to attack, and they were dead to that. So like, I make this whole play because of life total management, and then they just go and disregard it and attack anyway. So thanks, opponent, for wrecking my math. Here we got a Frog, got a couple cantrips, have an Unearth and an Oculus and a Dream. Opponent, kind of like game one, has got the mana acceleration, has the card selection, has some amount of the payoff with like this Myco Spawn here. I need to slow the game down. Obviously, if I don't find a land, life's pretty rough anyway, but gotta do what you gotta do. That is, by all technicalities, a land. Now I can Thought Scour myself, maybe pick up a third land to be able to frog, discard Oculus, unearth it right away. Again, choosing to fight over the card selection a little bit, hoping they don't also have the payoffs. Unfortunately, they do have backup card selection. Now, I was like optimistic here because, like, okay, I get the frog, get to discard the Oculus, get back the Oculus. And I think they revealed that they got a Null Drifter. So, unfortunately, I didn't even, or no, they didn't. They got an Eldrazi temple and then found a Null Drifter off that Ancient Stirrings. So if you see the line, you know the pain we're about to endure of just hard cast this Null Drifter, get to trigger the Kozilek's Return in the graveyard. If you don't know Kozilek's Return, it's got a special little trigger from the graveyard that says if you cast a colorless spell like CMC 7 or greater, you can exile from your yard and do 5 damage to everything instead of the 2 that it does on the front half. So they get to kill Frog, kill the Oculus, kill the tokens, resolve Null Drifter, and everything kind of wrecks me from there. So they just added another Null Drifter to their hand. They have the mana to cast, or they added a World Breaker to their hand. They have the mana to cast it. I'm going down to 1 land. Can't do anything. Scoop it up onto the next one. Eldrazi has everything on the play. GLHF. All right, so we got a Faithless Looting on 1, ditching Dwarven Mind, Raucous Theater. So we know it's Jund Creativity off the bat, which is decent for me. I could have forced that, hoping that they were like a... I could have forced it hoping that they were like a Hollow One deck, but I decided to take the over and bet on them being the more popular, higher placing deck, which is Jund Creativity at the moment. And if they discarded something like an Archon, then I would have the ability to force a negation that on turn 2. So that's why I did not force the Faithless Looting on turn 1. Now they have the discard Archon, so life a little bit sketchier. Bad. Thankfully, this Wrenn means they don't have the Persist at the moment. We're going to Thoughtseize me. We're just going to discard everything, which means they are just dead to Oculus plus Psychic Frog. I think they're dead anyway if I just ditched my hand, which I probably would. They'd have to have a bolt or something for the token. But game 2, sideboarding. Not a whole lot to do. I took out Grist because they're kind of clunky and a couple Fatal Push, and boarded in the 2 copies of Nihil Spellbomb and the 2 Harbinger of the Seas. But I do think Jund Creativity is like a pretty good matchup. There can be some annoying starts, but as long as you can like interact over the creativity, and a lot of their kill spells are kind of meh. They spend a few turns just setting up. And here I'm just hoping to like blind flip over an Oculus or a, what's it called? Blind flip over an Oculus or a Harbinger. It happened to hit the Oculus. There's the Harbinger. Let's see, there's a bunch of dead cards on my side. Table's pretty good. So if they had a... seeing all these lands off the mulls is kind of rough, but c'est la vie. We do get to flip this Harbinger face up. Shut off creativity, but they can still have like discard and Archon and Persist. which is what they have. Now, the face-bound card under the Oculus is a Psychic Frog. I decided to keep the Psychic Frog, ditch the Harbinger, because I can flip up the Frog, attack with the Oculus and the Frog, and at least not force the jump block, but put them down to 2 and hopefully get the jump block. So we do get a little fortunate there. They decide to trade off the Oculus, which means I've just got Psychic Frog plus some interaction into whatever they got going on. We're pretty covered for creativity. We are not covered if they have creativity plus something like Veil of Summer. We have a little insulation from Thoughtseize for our Surveil land because I don't need the Force Negation at the moment. Attack with the Frog first. I would like to find a blue spell to be able to play Oculus, hold up Force, which is exactly what we do. And hopefully that'll let me get across the finish line. I would not fault anybody. I wouldn't fault anybody at all if they decided instead of playing the Oculus hold up Force to just pass and hold up hard cast Force. So if the opponent had something like Thoughtseize, you could play around that. My thought was I kind of want to play around removal spell a little bit more, or like removal spell into a creativity. And this plays around that better since I can just let them kill one of my threats. The other one is still going to be lethal and interact with whatever the last spell is. And if they have Thoughtseize, I'll kind of lose to that. But they've already shown me multiple Thoughtseize, so I feel the odds are a little bit lower that they've got another one in hand and haven't cast it the last couple turns. They go for big creativity. We go for Force Negation. They scoop it up. And we move on to the next round, which I think might be the last one. Can't remember off the top of my head. Either way, we're on the draw. We do have a turn 2 Psychic Frog. Got to shoot the Sheriff. Bloodstained Mire could mean basically anything. I kind of start thinking the Mirror now whenever I see Bloodstained Mire, which turns out it is, but if you're running Sultai or thinking about running Sultai, be sure to swap your Bloodstained Mires over to Verdant Catacombs because Bloodstained Mire cannot get Breeding Pool or Edge Maze, but Verdant Catacombs can get those as well as your basic Swamp, which is what Bloodstained Mire was kind of there for in the first place. So, that in mind. They Frog, we kill Frog. They Thought Scour, we hit with Frog. We are in kind of commanding board position here because we have a Frog that's living. I could go for hard casting the Oculus to be perfectly reasonable, but if they counterspelled that, I felt like I didn't have a lot going on, and I'd rather just hold up like Force Negation on their turn, try to protect this Frog for another turn. However, it looks like they're probably just sitting on multiple copies of Counterspell, the way they shocked in there. So we're just going to sit here and Frog v Frog. So very much off in the face of Brazen Borrower. Borrower's kind of fine. Especially if we get to resolve this Oculus. Fatal Push, really good pickup. Now we get to kind of start slow rolling a little bit. I don't like calling it slow rolling, but we get to take our time. Opponent's down to a Borrower, a Bowmaster, one card in hand, drawing up to 2. And if we resolve this Oculus, more than likely it's like game over at that point. Now they've shown us that one of their cards doesn't matter, and this is what I would call like all lights green kind of scenario. Like just jam your stuff here because I've got a hard cast Oculus. I've got counterspell to fight over their counterspell. I've got force negation on their turn if they happen to find an answer to Oculus. And I know that this Oculus is going to be able to like outmuscle this Brazen Borrower. So you can force negation to consider there if you want to. And I would not blame you in the slightest because it really is at this point. I've got an Oculus that's living. I don't really care that much about what's going on the other side. I've got an Oculus and a Graveyard Trespasser. Plus Counterspell up, Fatal Push up, GLHF. Oculus is fine. We get to kill that or go for the kill spell. If they have the counter spell for the kill spell, in this case, I choose to go for the counter spell because I just have lethal. If they had tapped for like, I don't know, some random counter, say a minor misstep where I thought there was a chance they might have another counter spell, then I might consider not going for the counter just to keep it. Or no, they hard cast the Oculus already, so it's already going to flip today. So no, we need to fight over this regardless. Since it's going to flip today. If it wasn't going to flip today, then there's an argument to not do it just because we're going to trade Oculus. The Graveyard Trespasser triggers twice, exiles their Oculus and a Bowmaster, and the token gets in. So they have to chump block one of those or like trade tokens, and we just get the Trespasser with force up. So either way, it's fine. It's fine. Got Dark Slick Shores. I have seen several people running Dark Slick Shores recently, and I'm not huge on it just because if your argument is like playing cards like Thought Scour because you need to fill up the graveyard aggressively, why are you making that plan worse by running things like Dark Slick Shores that aren't as well into or aren't as good at enabling Harbinger, are worse against opposing Blood Moons, and don't fill your yard as aggressively for Oculus? Maybe someone's got a better answer to that for me, but for me personally, I don't have a lot of good thoughts there. So we find a Grist, go to Unearth a Grist, they got a counter spell, decide to just let that resolve, hold up my interaction. Really don't, especially on a situation like this where I don't have a lot of land drops and my hand's a little bit slow developing. I don't really want to tap out and risk my opponent having like some big payoff spell on their turn, like counter spell into untap, fetch land, Thought Scour themselves, play an Oculus, and go to my turn. I have to like shoot the Sheriff the Oculus, but they've already got a token off of it. Instead, I'm okay with kind of this slow things down a little bit, stop the explosive turn. Obviously doesn't pay off very well for me, but never mind. Paid off a lot better for me. So we are going to get an attack in with the frog. I know they get a token, but I really need to like find another land, find something else to do, get the Oculus off the board. If I just like kill the Oculus and pass, or just pass with Abrupt Decay up, it's getting back into that pattern of playing to not lose instead of playing to win. Like, hey, my opponent's gonna ping me off of this Bowmaster, but I kind of need to draw some stuff. They have an answer to the Oculus. I'm pretty much DOB, but yeah. Where land drops are nice. Either way, miss land drops, miss the win. Go to game number 3. We are on the play. We got a spell bomb, a little bit of interaction. We've got some surveil lands we can get. I'm a little more lenient on keeping more land heavy hands if they have a couple pieces of good interaction and their fetches so that I can get the surveil lands. But like last turn, I'm not tapping off of that flooded strand because I don't want my opponent to respond to the fetch with resolving a Bowmaster. I'd rather just go to my turn, play another land, hold up counterspell. And like we saw there, they did go for the Flash and Bowmaster and didn't have a follow-up. So we got to essentially buy ourselves like a few turns here by interacting with that Bowmaster, which is a really big deal when you're talking about like a few turn window here that makes a difference between getting overrun and stabilizing. So for us, having like a slower hand, being able to stabilize a good bit is really big deal. Again, I feel like my opponent has got a counter spell of some sort, but them not fighting over my removal spell on the frog is pretty good discipline. To then try to like fight over my Oculus instead. Or in this case, fight over my protection spell for the Oculus. Which I try to save because like I've got nothing else going on if the Oculus gets killed. Even if I don't want to spend the spell on it. But I feel like they don't have a backup threat. We'll kind of talk about that real quick. So a lot of it is feel when you get to this point. Like they top decked the frog or they had the Bowmaster. I countered the Bowmaster and like tapped out going into their turn and they didn't play anything, which makes me think they don't have or didn't have a backup threat. And they drew the frog, played it, and I killed it. They didn't counter it. Still felt like they didn't have a backup threat, or their backup threat was something like an Oculus or a Murktide that they just couldn't cast, maybe an Oculus. Where I play out my threat, I don't have a backup, but if this threat gets dealt with, like if it doesn't get dealt with, I win the game. Frog maybe wins the game. Oculus definitely wins the game from here if it doesn't get dealt with. So I'm a little more inclined to protect it than protect a frog. That makes much sense at all. Oculus better than frog at solo winning the game. There you go. Looks like an Oculus from them. But our top decks are better. Because we get to kill everything. Get to push a token, Abrupt Decay, and Oculus. And they had flipped over another Oculus off their first Oculus, which is hilarious because that would have wrecked my entire world. Petty Theft, my Psychic Frog, and then Thoughtseize me. See Grist. Have to take the Grist, which I think is really, really funny. Now we're down to Brazen Borrower v Frog. Just hoping that our opponent is either not running Murktide or doesn't see a Murktide. That card would mess our world up, but anything else, we're pretty happy to have. Fatal Push and Abrupt Decay. I could go for the double ping, like kill off the Bowmaster, kill off the token, and draw a card off of the frog, but I don't want to give up my removal spells, especially now that my opponent has got the mana available to potentially what's it called? Potentially Oculus. If they'd had like no graveyard, I'd be more inclined to make sure I get a draw off the frog, but if they had a graveyard, I kind of want to trade off some cheap tokens and a card and keep my removal. But here we're kind of going all in. Like, we got a counter spell, you don't, potentially. Our clock beats yours. You're on a 4-turn clock, we're on a 2. Last 2 cards are Fatal Push, Counterspell. Pretty good. Thankfully, we find an answer to the Brazen Barber. So now we are in classic Dimir, who top decks a threat first mode. Thankfully, our top deck does not disappoint. So here's an Oculus. Oculus flips Graveyard Trespasser. Pretty good thing to flip here in this spot. Now that we're kind of like solidly ahead. And opponent scoops our Graveyard Trespasser. I believe that was the end of the Swiss. We ended up 5-2. I believe we were 19th place. X and 2 went from like 6th all the way down to 30 something. Ridiculously big X and 2 split. So picking up that first loss kind of early really hurt us in the long run. But that's how it goes with premier events. You really need to start off strong, and then you can pick up your losses later. Helps out your tiebreakers a lot more. But other than that, like, we got to see Abrupt Decay showing a lot of work in the mirror. Gris took out a Murktide. We didn't get to see any Collector Oof matchups, which was kind of sad, but everything else pretty well hold its weight at one point or another. If you're not convinced on the Sultai splash, which is a perfectly reasonable take, I don't even know if I'm convinced at the moment, but I always want to try stuff out. Long Goodbye has been a fantastic Abrupt Decay replacement in the main deck for me. Because the Oculus mirrors are so popular, being able to have an uncounterable answer to frogs or to the eyeballs is a really big deal. And it lets you kind of interact when you want to interact, not when you happen to have a window or not when you think you have a window. You get to like make your own window and say, I'm going to kill that now and it's going to die, period, done. Other than that, don't leave home with less than 4 consigned memories. I keep seeing lists with 2 or 3, and I guess people think that's enough, but like, you're just not going to beat Eldrazi or have a chance against Eldrazi with less. And there's a pretty good chance, especially online, that you're going to see some Eldrazi variants. So kind of be prepared for those. Harbinger, if you're on straight Dimir, I think Harbinger is really good in the main. I wanted to move it to the sideboard so I'd have a better chance of like casting these main deck decays and grists. So definitely some test consideration there. But other than that, yeah, pretty fun challenge, decent results. Looking forward to running some more of them. Hope you enjoyed the video. As always, hope you have a fantastic rest of your day. Stay safe, enjoy some good food and company, and I will catch y'all back live later. Adios for now.